and welcome to Pilot Talk Podcast. I am thrilled to be here today. I'm your host, René Banglesdorf, and I am interviewing a longtime friend and client, a corporate pilot of more than 22 years, Bill Bryant, who is currently stuck in snowy Toronto. But if you're listening to this in the summer, you're going to wish you were in snowy Toronto. So welcome, Bill. Thanks for joining me. I can't wait to hear what you have to say about flying the Challenger 605.
Hello, Renee. How are you doing? And welcome to snowy Toronto.
All right. Well, let's talk about getting away from Toronto, maybe in a Challenger 605. You've flown these all over the world. Tell me about the best place you've ever gone in a Challenger 605.
Well, the 605 is probably my most experienced aircraft. For the last 9 years, I've been flying the aircraft, even the 601, the earlier version before that. But the 605, I've been to probably one of the craziest places I've been to was El Monte, Kazakhstan. It was virtually another world.
Did you land in a dust storm or something? Was it crazy?
Was an amazing city. It's a very oil-rich country. It totally took me by surprise with huge downtown, brand new glass, tall skyscrapers, most of them empty. But the people and the culture, it was something that was just like landing on the moon. It was like they'd never seen this airplane before.
Well, that's crazy. So, you know what? I want to take advantage of the fact here that you have flown in the Challenger 600 series for a long time. And will you explain to our listeners the differences, the upgrades that Bombardier's made over the years to the Challenger 600 line?
Well, the Challenger 600, it's been around for decades. And they originally changed the engines to the GE engines, which are a fantastic engine. They made some changes to the anti-icing system. They've added a lot of fuel tanks to it, increased the range is probably the most prevalent thing they have done. But the airplane from a design standpoint has been probably the best, widest body, largest business jet, most popular in its class.
And you've been flying that for 9 or even longer years. Tell me its biggest strength.
The biggest strength is the size of the cabin. Out of any large business jet, and for the price as well, you are getting the most roomiest cabin in the market. It's 8 foot 2 inches wide and 6 foot 2 inches tall. There's a lot of room inside with a nice big galley, a nice big lavatory, huge cockpit. So one of the biggest advantages of this aircraft is you're getting a lot of room for the plane.
Well, I tease you about this a lot, so I'm going to ask you again, but you're not a small guy. You're 6'5". Tell me about, from a pilot comfort standpoint, what the cockpit's like. You alluded to it a little bit, but I want to clarify.
This cockpit on the 605 is enormous. It's huge. So for a tall guy like myself at 6'5", it's not an issue at all. The rudder pedals, when they're put down to the floor, you get a lot of, you can stretch right out in the cockpit. So no issues at all. Headroom, virtually the only corporate business jet I'd be able to stand up in would be a BBJ, but other than that, I'm usually bending over at some point because they haven't made anything smaller with a 7-foot cabin yet.
At least you're not flying with your knees up in your chest trying to fly the airplane.
Not in this aircraft. Perhaps in the CJs and the smaller Citation jets, yes, but this aircraft, you have lots of room.
You had to learn in something like a 172 or something. You were
I learned a 152, and my instructor was 220 pounds and 6'4", and I was pretty much the same. And we couldn't go very far. We couldn't take a lot of fuel, otherwise we'd be way over gross weight. But it was pretty tight in that little airplane learning to fly.
Well, I'm glad you've graduated. So let's talk a little bit more about the performance of the 605? Range, cruising altitude, cruising speed. Tell me the goodies there.
Yeah, the aircraft, will go 4,000 nautical miles. And I've flown the airplane regularly, 9-hour flights. The most, I believe, was about 9 hours and 12 minutes was the longest flight I've done on it. I did direct from Honolulu, Hawaii to Toronto in 8 hours and 25 minutes with a strong tailwind. So the aircraft will go a long way. And the biggest drawback of this aircraft, and that's throughout the Challenger lines, is that the maximum cruising altitude is flight level 410, 41,000 feet. You cannot go any higher than that. So if you've ever flown any other aircraft where you've been above flight level 410, from a pilot standpoint, and it may not be something that the passengers notice, but from a pilot standpoint, you can get above a lot more of the weather. You don't have to divert as much, and you can get out of the headwinds when you're flying westbound. The 605 does not go above flight level 410, and that's probably the biggest complaint from a pilot standpoint.
So tell me about taking off and getting to your cruising altitude and how fast you're typically going when you're flying.
Yeah, the aircraft will cruise. Normally we cruise at Mach 80, 81. Long range, unlike other larger business jets, you do have to slow it down to about Mach 7.6 to get the real long range out of the aircraft. Performance-wise, off the runway, it performs quite well. You don't have leading-edge slats, but you have a really large brake, so it does have a great braking system. So getting in and out of a 5,000-foot runway isn't much of an issue at all.
Good to know. So you've already said what the craziest landing place. What's your favorite location to go into?
Actually, people ask me that all the time, what my favorite destination is, and I always tell them, it depends on the season. So in the winter season, of course, the Caribbean's always great. In the springtime and the fall time, Cabo San Lucas or Bermuda is great. In the summertime, there's nothing nicer than the French Riviera.
You've had some really, really interesting adventures, and I am going to get into that later because I call you the rock star pilot, and there is definitely a reason for that. But before we get there, let's talk about the cabin. What do flight attendants tell you about flying in the 605? What's their experience?
There's been no complaints at all with the flight attendants for the Challenger 605. It's a great aircraft. It's got a huge galley. There's lots of storage in the aircraft, and a nice big lavatory at the back. Probably the only drawback and complaint on larger flights is that the galley tends to be a little cold. So they tend to be drafty, and most of the time your flight attendant is sitting up on a jump seat between the pilots, and it's not all that comfortable. So that's probably the biggest drawback with the aircraft from a flight attendant standpoint.
And how about from the passengers? What do passengers say about flying in the aircraft? Is there anything that they say, oh man, I just wish this aircraft had this feature?
Well, everybody likes to have more room in an airplane, be able to add more passengers. But from a passenger standpoint, the aircraft is quiet, and the aircraft either has a configuration of either 10 seats or 12 seats, so a lot of room. Turbulence-wise, it has a stiff spar in it, so you do feel the turbulence a little bit more sharply than, let's say, a Gulfstream or a Global, where you've got a much larger, flexible wing. This is kind of like a wing, like a straight, stiff wing, like a Lear 35. You're feeling the bumps as you're going through the clouds more than you would on other aircraft. And that's probably the only difference in the aircraft. But noise level-wise, it's very quiet in the airplane, and very smooth.
Fantastic. Well, let me ask you some questions. Since you've been around these aircraft so much, you know about maintenance that comes up and problems that the aircraft has. You've been through a number of airplane changes, so purchasing 605s, and you know some of the things that people are going to face when they're buying one. Can you talk a little bit about the things that you look for in a pre-buy, some of the things that come up with maintenance that might be something to look out for if someone's buying a 605?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I've flown a number of these Challenger 605s, probably about 7 or 8 of them, different years over the last several years. And what you really want to look out for most of all is to make sure that all the avionic upgrades have been completed. That is, it has CPPLC, fans 1A, the upgraded transponder for Europe. Those are the big issues, because the airplane avionic upgrades in any aircraft are expensive, and you want to make sure the airplane has those modifications done. They recently came out with the Challenger 650, the newer version of the 605, and that's basically an avionic upgrade with synthetic vision. The airplane does have an option for synthetic vision on the 605. I don't recommend it. I think the screens on the airplane are too small for it. Much prefer spending your $300,000 on something else in the airplane. But the avionic upgrades are definitely, you want to make sure that you're capable of flying the altitudes you want to fly, especially over North America and over Atlantic, so that you're not stuck down low burning more fuel. And these altitudes and these requirements are all going to be required for North America very shortly as well, RVSM airspace. So having the avionic upgrades pay for themselves in time and ability.
Great. Well, talk to me a little bit about cabin management systems and passenger control of the various amenities in the cabin.
There's 2 cabin manufacturers for the Challenger 605. You have, of course, Bombardier, the manufacturer of the aircraft, and then you also had a mid-coast interior. I wouldn't suggest considering a mid-coast interior, simply because they don't make them anymore, and it's very hard to find spare parts if you do have a mid-coast interior. But the Bombardier interior is a fantastic interior. It comes with a cabin entertainment system and monitor that you can either control everything from the lights to what we're seeing on cabin screens, either in the cockpit or in the galley. The interior wears well, has a lot of various options, it's very good quality. And you really notice this when you're getting into major inspections in the airplane, where you have to remove the interior for some of these major inspections, put it back in again. The interior seems to hold up really well.
How about the landing gear, Bill? You talked a little bit about the brakes. Tell me what your experience has been with landing.
Well, this airplane has trailing link landing gear, so you can get some very nice smooth landings out of it. If you've ever flown in a Citation Ultra or Gulfstream 4, it's stiff, straight gear on it. It's hard to get a smooth landing on this aircraft. This airplane lands quite smoothly and has anti-skid, which works very effectively. And I find the landing gear is very, very rugged. And of course, with this landing gear, they've gone to what's called proximity sensing switches on the landing gear, which will basically tell the aircraft's computer whether it's in the air or on the ground, activating certain systems. These proximity sensors used to cause a lot of problems with older models of Challengers, like the 601, when they were actually squat switches. They actually had to make a connection. These new ones don't have to make a connection on the 605 model, and gotten rid of a lot of the nuisance problems we had with these weight on wheels squat switches.
Well, okay, this question is always going to be important to me, and you're probably already guessing what it is. Tell me about luggage capacity.
Well, the baggage capacity is great in this airplane. I mean, I've done every type of trip imaginable on this airplane. Never had a problem with luggage space, even with 10 sets of golf clubs and baggage. It's great. You can access the baggage from any altitude. You walk through the cabin, through the lavatory, you can walk straight into the baggage compartment even during flight. And you can also open up the baggage door from inside the aircraft, which makes it a lot easier to load and unload bags if someone on the outside isn't part of the crew. They're a ground service personnel, and you really don't want them closing your baggage door. You can do it yourself.
That is a really, really good point. Bill, have I forgotten to ask you anything about this airplane? Because you're just a wealth of knowledge. I feel like you've covered so many things. I really appreciate your time.
Well, I think that, the biggest advantage of this aircraft is its popularity. I mean, you can get service on this airplane virtually anywhere in the world. Bombardier has been fantastic with their service. It's an extremely reliable airplane. When people ask me what it's like to fly and what it's like to maintain, it's like a GMC truck. It just goes and goes and goes. And it's designed for doing short runs or long runs, lots of cycles, never any issues with this airplane at all. And as I said, for the price, you do get the biggest cabin in this class.
Well, going back to what you were saying about the availability of parts and service, it's very similar to in fact, built on the same platform as the CRJ. Is that right?
That's correct. The CRJ is virtually, if you look at a Challenger 605 and double the length of the cabin, and you have a CRJ.
And have you ever flown a CRJ? Does it fly the same?
I've flown the simulator, it's very close in proximity. You don't have as much thrust to weight ratio because you have a larger aircraft, the same engines. But other than that, I mean, it comes from the Challenger series line of aircraft, which have been extremely reliable, and especially with an airliner like a CRJ, a regional jet that is doing a lot of short hops, a lot of cycles, 80, 100 hours a month of flying. They have to be very reliable.
Well, the reason that I ask you that question is because we seem to be facing a worldwide pilot shortage. So if a Challenger might be a great pick for someone who has some concern about finding pilots, if it's going to be similar to fly to a CRJ, it would seem that there might be some pilots that would have some experience in a similar aircraft, and it wouldn't be a big stretch for them to move into a corporate environment.
That's correct. Yeah, from a CRJ into a Challenger 605, a lot of the systems are absolutely identical. The electrical system, hydraulic system, the main systems are all the same. It's a very easy transition.
Well, Bill, thank you so much for answering my questions about the Challenger 605 today. Again, my name is René Banglesdorf, and I've been your host. Bill Bryant has been my guest today. He's a fantastic pilot that I have known for years. You're not going to want to miss the interview where I talked to him about being a rock star pilot. You can reach me at René Banglesdorf on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. You can follow this podcast either on YouTube in the video form or on iTunes or Stitcher on the audio form. And you can reach Bill at...
Best to reach me by email. That's Bill without the I, BLLBRYANT at yahoo.ca. Don't forget it's CA, not com. CA for Canada.
You are Canadian. You didn't sound like it. You were very non-Canadian sounding on this interview. But Bill, I appreciate you so much. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Renee.